In this video, I'm going to walk through thinking about my SEP data with InnerOrbit's reports and picking SEP practice problems based upon my data. So when I log into my account, I'm going to click Reports. For this analysis, I'm going to use the school report. In the school report, you'll see all of your data broken up by dimension, DCI, SEP, and Crosscutting Concept. These percentages mean 79% of all of the questions I have assigned this year around analyzing and interpreting data have been answered correctly. I can stay high level and analyze the different SEPs in relation to each other, but I can also unpack the SEP by grade band and then by element to see how students are doing on specific parts of the science and engineering practice. So here it looks like I have 3-5 data. And then I can see how students are doing specifically on the elements of the 3rd through 5th grade band of constructing, explanation, and designing solutions. For SEP practice problems, I'm going to focus on the SEP that my students have been struggling with the most, planning and carrying out investigations. I see I have some data from 3-5 and 6-8. And I see that students are performing at 41% accuracy in terms of evaluate the accuracy of various methods for collecting data, but only 34% on collecting data to produce data to serve as the basis for evidence to answer scientific questions or test design solutions under a range of conditions. So I want to go choose science and engineering practices that will help my students on this specific SEP, planning out and carrying out investigations, and on these 2 specific elements as a re-teaching strategy. What I'll do from here is open another tab and build some SEP practice using that data. So let me go ahead and click Get Started. And the SEP practice problems are in this tile here. I was looking for middle school. These SEP practice problems are just focused on the science and engineering practice. Students do not need to have any content knowledge to be able to engage in these questions. They're meant to be building a specific muscle, specifically the SEP planning and carrying out investigations, without relying on content information or content understanding. As I scroll through, I'll see the questions have a tag for the SEP and specifically an element at the 6-8 grade band, since this is a middle school practice set, that this question is assessing. So what I can do from here is I can decide to choose specific questions that align to my data. So let's go back to my school report here. If I want questions on evaluate the accuracy of methods for collecting data, I'll scroll until I see that tag. And I see it here on question 7 and question 6. So I'll click add to quiz for both of those. And if I want questions on collect data to produce data to serve as the basis for evidence, let me go ahead and find that one. Here we go, collect data to produce data. So I'll see that for question 8 and question 9. So that's one way that you can use the SEP practice problems is build a specific assessment. You can also decide if you want students to practice the entire SEP around all of the elements for planning and carrying out investigations. I can also just click use all questions, which will bundle all of these questions from this SEP practice set in my new assessment. I'll go ahead and name my assessment and click save. Then what I can do as well, as I assign this assessment to my classes, I'll be able to see the data back in my school report, and specifically, I can filter my data for this SEP practice to see how my students did on the SEPs just on my SEP practice set. Happy orbiting!